In this video, we'll look at what makes the Necromancer a great class and not so great a class, and at the end, we'll give the verdict on how good was the Necromancer really. Necromancers have some of the coolest abilities in the game. The ability to summon the dead, use magical bones as weapons and armor, and cast immensely powerful, debilitating curses. These abilities make the Necromancer one of the strongest classes in Diablo 2, but the class does not come without its own set of weaknesses. In this video, we'll discuss the top 4 builds for Necromancers: Poison Nova, Summoner, Bone Spear, and Corpse Explosion. Each of these builds have pros and cons and are suited for different situations, and we'll discuss each one so you can decide for yourself how good the Necromancer is. Now, Necromancers have changed a lot over time in Diablo 2. Before patch 1.11, Necromancers could take advantage of the Marrowwalk bug. Marrowwalk were boots which granted level 33 Bone Prison charges, among other stats, and the game mistakenly granted level 33 Bone Prison while equipped to a Necromancer, giving massive synergy bonuses to Bone Spear, Bone Armor, and Bone Spirit, rendering Necromancers the king of PvP until it was fixed in patch 1.11. Not to mention, in patch 1.11, it also fixed a bug where Necromancers with Trag-Ul's set equipped could sometimes become invincible to attack. Not broken at all. However, the Bone Spear Necromancer build is still considered a top build for Necromancers. The build utilizes the magic damage of Bone Spear, which does linear AoE with Corpse Explosion, doing fire and physical AoE, as well as strong defensive options with Bone Prison and Bone Shield. What's especially nice about this is the diversity of damage types, and many monsters in the game have no magic damage reduction, making Bone Spear very handy. The build itself has incredible survivability with the ability to take on lots of bone prisons. It's beginner friendly since it's not very complicated, and 3 distinct damage types: fire, physical, and magic, making it a great build. However, the downsides is that there is a lot of ability spamming. You'll be making a bunch of prisons, cursing amplified damage, then shooting a bunch of bone spears, and then using Corpse Explosion. That's a lot of abilities to clear just a room full of monsters. In addition to lots of ability spamming required, the build doesn't have great endgame potential, usually being used as a leveling build rather than an endgame build or for PvP purposes, and the cherry on top is that if you want to realistically maximize your build, key pieces of gear for this build are hard to find. Overall, though, Bone Spear Necromancer falls sort of middle of the road. It's not the greatest build, but it's not the worst, and you can find plenty of success leveling with the build and pushing some endgame content. Like all Necromancer builds, it's not the fastest for leveling, but it is certainly quicker than the Summoner Necromancer build. Next, let's talk about the Poison Nova build. This build is amazing at AoE and is one of the best Necromancer builds you can go. This build uses Poison Nova as its primary ability, but also relies on Corpse Explosion, which gives this build poison, fire, and physical damage at its disposal, which makes this build powerful at getting around monster immunes. This build also benefits from having a Mercenary with Infinity, which will grant Conviction Aura, which lowers the defense and resistances of monsters around the Mercenary. On top of all that, amplified damage will cause monsters to take 100% more damage, making this build even that much more powerful. Remember though, although players cannot die from poison damage and will be left with 1 life, monsters, mercenaries, and pets can all actually die from poison damage. This means that Poison Nova can clear monsters, after which Corpse Explosion can be used to finish off any survivors. This build puts points into amplified damage, lower resist, since it does a lot of poison and fire damage, also bone armor for survivability, skeleton mastery for synergies, revive for strong summons, golem mastery to improve iron golem, which can bring an aura like meditation for mana regeneration, and summon resist to help all of your summons stay alive in hell mode. And of course, the build relies on the key abilities of Poison Nova, Poison Explosion for synergies, Poison Dagger for synergies, and Corpse Explosion. The downside is that it can be hard to play since there are so many abilities to use. Since it's also so AoE focused, it's not great at slaying bosses at all, and of course it's not a build you can run from the beginning. You'd need to respec into it. And last, it is definitely gear dependent in order to reach full potential. Overall though, this build is top tier because it has those 3 different types of damage, it can clear lots of monsters very quickly, and it is one of the absolute best Necromancer builds, and also one of the best builds you can run in the entire game. Next, let's talk about one of my favorite Necromancer builds, the Summoner Necromancer. As you might have guessed, this build relies on Raised Skeleton, Skeleton Mastery, Revive, and that great support skill, Summon Resist. Other than those key abilities, this build does also run with Iron Golem for the aura, Decrepify for slowing monsters, Dim Vision for crowd control, and Lower Resist for when it's time to burn monsters down with Corpse Explosion. This build is great because it has incredible survivability. The Necromancer can sit safely in the back lines while his minions clear away any threats. This build is also great because, like the other builds we discussed, it also has access to physical, fire damage, with Corpse Explosion, allowing to get around certain immunities. And unlike the previous build, it can actually handle bosses quite nicely with minions and mercenaries all on the boss. However, this build also does not come without weaknesses. It is certainly gear dependent and is one of the slowest builds in the game because minions tend to go where they want, and it takes some time to learn how to position yourself to get your minions where you want them. Once you get Enigma, you can telestomp or teleport right on your opponent, and all your minions and your mercenary will be teleported with you right on top of where you teleported to and smack your target for massive damage. But Enigmas don't grow on trees, of course, so it does take some time to acquire that. This is a build I wouldn't recommend to level with because of how slow this build is. In fact, it is one of the slowest builds you can go for leveling in the entire game. So I'd recommend perhaps Bone Spear instead, since it is much better suited for leveling. Last, let's talk about the Corpse Explosion Necromancer, or CE Necromancer. This build relies on Corpse Explosion's AoE to take out mobs en masse. Having a mercenary with Conviction Aura helps this build a lot because of that fire damage from Corpse Explosion, as well as lower resist just being icing on the cake. This build also relies on Raised Skeleton and Skeleton Mastery, as well as some of the 1-point wonders for Necromancers, including Bone Armor, Iron Golem, Revive, Raised Skeletal Mage, and Bone Prison, along with the prereqs for those skills. This build really shines because of the great survivability from the summons and bone defensive skills. Like the other builds we discussed, it has multiple sources of damage, and what's great is that it can clear most types of content. Even better, it's great at clearing high monster density areas like the Secret Cow level. The downsides are that, like the other Necro builds, it does require specific gear and higher than average amount of casting, since you'll be using curses, summons, and Corpse Explosion to effectively play this style. When it comes to how good this build is overall, it's definitely not top tier, but it's also not the worst build. It falls about middle of the road in terms of strength. Overall, Summon Necromancer and Poison Nova Necromancer are the two top builds for Necromancers, are considered some of the best builds in the entire game regardless of class. Other builds can be used for leveling, but eventually fall short. The Necromancer is not the fastest class to level, especially if playing Summon Necromancer first, but it can be okay in terms of speed if going Bone Spear build to level with first. If you're looking for a class with high survivability and some of the coolest looking spells in the game, Necromancer might be right for you. Thanks for watching, and if you like the video, don't forget to give it a like. Subscribe for more Diablo 2 Resurrected content. My name is Toyhouse, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.